can compare? Come, let us adore him.
We were in the letter. We started in chapter 1. We went 1 through 11, which after it was over felt like a whirlwind, like it was a lot to cover in one. So just by way of recap, we saw in the beginning of the letter, Paul greeted the church that he clearly has an affection for and was very thankful for, number one. Number two, he believes that the way that they are going is the way that they should be going, that they're conducting themselves. It makes it evident that Christ is at work in their lives, in their hearts. And of course, he prays and has full expectation that Christ is going to complete the work that he has begun in them. He also expresses that he misses them, and he's very grateful for the support that they have been giving him. And then lastly, he prays that they will continue to grow in Christian love, which will allow them to truly honor God and maintain their salvation. Not earn, but help them to maintain their salvation. All right, so the kind of our takeaway lesson from last week was that our maturity in Christ is measured by our love. So we talked about how much there was so many different examples of love in this letter already, and looked at some other references that pertain to how important it is that we will be known by how much we love each other. We also took a look at that and reinforced it with 1 Timothy 1:5. But the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. And we talked about cultivating agape love. Cultivating that agape love with pure intentions allows for a clear conscience as well as clear confidence of our standing with Christ, with no fear of the past. We get to have that peace that comes underneath the grace of God. You know, it made me think one thing I don't think I really shared last week. That thought, no fear of the past. You think about what happens in the waters of baptism. Our past is left there. It's left in the water. We come up out of that water the most pristine that we can be, right? That very second that we come up, we are as pure as we can be. We've been washed anew and are spotless at that second anyway. And of course, we know that we have to have the intercession of Jesus for us, because it doesn't take us long, unfortunately, to have that first moment, whether it's a angry moment or an impure thought or a flat out just overt stumble. But it's that past that's still left. And so when we come together each week and we partake of the Lord's Supper, you know, it's truly not just some people don't understand why we do it so much, but it goes back to that moment of baptism when we're in communion with our Lord, that gives us that opportunity to renew that spirit, to be in that repentant posture in the most humble of ways, in communion with Him. And so it's it's just so amazing that it's been that way for so long. And so that's just kind of a little bit of a recap before we jump into today. You know, ultimately we are going to make it to kind of the meat and potatoes, if you will, of this letter, which is Paul writing to them, encouraging them to grow in their maturity. He's going to actually lay out 6 different examples of things that they can do to emulate these examples of Christian maturity, which will help them achieve spiritual fullness, which is what he desires for them. So, but before getting to this section, this is going to be our starting point for today. We're going to be in lesson 3, which is based around chapter 1, verses 12 through 26. Now, I don't know that we're going to actually try and make it all the way to 26 today. So we're going to kind of take it as it goes. This lesson 3, may be lesson 3.5, and then half move into 4 next week. We'll see how long we go here. But, lesson 3, as I said, is still in chapter 1. And really this is a situation where he's writing to them because remember, it is a letter. He's communicating with these brethren. And so as he had in the beginning, he was setting it up and praying for them and all that. But now he really wants to let them know kind of what's going on with him, the circumstances around his current situation, because he clearly hasn't seen them in a while. It's been, like we said last week, about a decade since he initially started the church. So we want to take a look at that. Now, he is going to talk to them about the circumstances that surround his ministry, what's been going on with his ministry, but also we're going to get to a point where he kind of talks to them about the circumstances of this dilemma that he has. So we're going to begin in verse 12. Philippians 1:12. Now I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel. So here he describes both the bad and the good of the situation. He clearly understands that these circumstances that he's facing there's some that are kind of he would denote as bad circumstances surrounding his ministry, but then also a lot of good things that have come out of it as well. So he's going to kind of go back and forth as we progress through the letter here. So number one, the first thing, Paul's circumstances regarding his ministry, number one, bad, his imprisonment, right? Here he is, he's been imprisoned. It's an injustice. We know that it's an injustice. He's arrested for no cause. He's been kept in prison without charges. He transferred to Rome once he made this appeal to be brought before Caesar. And then he spent an additional 2 years imprisoned. Even though it was kind of a house arrest situation, it's still him awaiting a hearing. And while he can have people come and go, it's still one of those things that's an encumbrance, right? It's kind of a bad thing, the imprisonment, because it is definitely hindering him from making his way around to all of the different places he would have gone had he not been limited and not able to do so. So number two, he jumps, if you look at it from the perspective of good, it is the work of the gospel. Despite what could have limited many other people, he has, which of course we just laid out, it's the jailing of the number one proponent for the gospel on the face of the earth at this point. The gospel has prospered nevertheless. So that is clearly a good circumstance, if you will, that has come out of his imprisonment. And we're going to get into that in a little more detail and how he was still the most strong advocate for the gospel even during his imprisonment. So now we go to number 3, which we have labeled as bad, and it is Philippians 1:13. So that my imprisonment in the cause of Christ has become well known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and to everyone else. So remember, he's under house arrest. He's in rented quarters. And he only has one guard, it tells us, back in Acts 28, where we kind of set all this up, where we didn't actually read through all of that. But if you continue in Acts, where we left off last week, it talks about the fact that he had one guard. And so that clearly wasn't one person 24/7, 365. It would have been a changing of the guard that would have gone on. Would have been changed at least daily, but we don't know for sure what the cycle of guards would have been. But there would have been a number of guards that would have ended up having exposure to Paul and the praying and the teachings as he had conversations back and forth with people that were coming and going during his house arrest. So it would have also really explained why he mentions the Praetorian Guard repeatedly, because this is definitely a group of people that had exposure to him. And as you can imagine, he's pretty famous at this point, so the things that were going on there could have been talked about in their homes, likely were talked about in their homes. And so things that he was talking about doing, the way he's praying, these things would have been observed. And I think it's one of those things where clearly he was leading by example. He was also striving to stay in the faithful posture in which he was encouraging other people to be in, and this was witnessed. And it really made me think about the fact that people see us today as well, and they get to see us in our low moments, they get to see us in our high moments, they get to see us here where we're together when we come for worship, but they also get to see us out in the community. In my employment, I've been working for the same company for 21 years. And so many people see me in different settings, and so they know that ideally I'm the way that I am today is the same way I was 20 years ago, in as far as being a Christian. And I've never, of course, been ashamed of that or shied away from that, and the things that I've abstained from and allowed myself to be a part of. And I feel like this many years later, a lot of the people that I have worked with for a number of years understand. There's just certain things in certain places we don't even need to bother to invite Bruce to. But at the same token, they also see me and know that I'm not ashamed. I'm not a bashful Christian, and that if I tell them I'll pray for them, they know I will, and those things. And that I might share something with you guys at the end, just depending on how much we get, because it's just important for us to remember that people see us in our good moments and our bad moments, and they can tell when we're how we conduct ourselves in the open and in a lot of times even in private when we don't think that they're seeing us. So just one of those things that as I was thinking about and reflecting upon this week. So now we come to another good regarding the circumstances of Paul's ministry. So the opportunity for the gospel. So the fact that Paul was to appear from what some scholars labeled as the Supreme Court of the world at this time. I mean, this going before Caesar, the imperial court, was a big deal. This is the place that we would see in America. The Supreme Court, and this is like the Supreme Court of the world. So he's going to explain and defend the gospel and his role in preaching it. And all of this had been foretold by Jesus, which I think is one of those things we absolutely have to pause and leave Philippians to look at. So Luke chapter 12, verse 11 says, "When they bring you before the synagogues and the rulers and the authorities, do not worry about how or what you are to speak in your defense or what you are to say." So he has a lot of confidence already. He knows that he's going to have to go before this. He asked for this, So here we see right off the bat a strong example. This one is from Luke 21. This is 12 through 13. Verse 12 starts, "But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony." Wow, this is exactly what's happened. And we've seen him go before these governors and these kings and be persecuted, of course, charged, locked up, even having been beaten and these things for no cause. But it's going to lead to this opportunity for him to give his testimony and convey the gospel to the highest ruler in the land at this point. Let's look at this one. This is from Acts chapter 9, 13 through 16. "But Ananias answered, 'Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he did to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority for the chief priest to bind all who call on your name.' But the Lord said to him, 'Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the sons of Israel. For I will show him how much he has suffered for my name's sake.'" Wow, this is so important, right? Because we're talking about Ananias is afraid to go see Saul, who becomes Paul, right? So this is, I thought this was pretty profound because clearly it speaks once again to, many times last week we talked about the providence of God and the things we could see at work in his plan. This plan to come before Caesar was well known to Christ and part of God's plan. So it's just, I think, notable that this is laid out speaking of Paul. So, just imagine, he's going to come face to face with the emperor, the person who could Because let's think about it. He could actually put Paul to death. He could. So, it's one of those things that it is one of those he asked for when he made this appeal to Caesar, but he fully knew that he could actually be ruled against in the grand plan there. Any questions or concerns or thoughts? Anything? All right. So remember when I said he could die, this is going to lead up to later on when we talk about the circumstances around his dilemma. So as I mentioned before, remember he's going before Caesar, which means, and we know he's been guarded by the Praetorian Guard. So I kind of wanted to take just kind of this little rabbit hole for just a second and look at the Praetorian Guard a little bit closer for you guys, just to set up, why they're important. They're not just security guards. These folks are the imperial guards. They are meant to guard Caesar's court, his people, but also distinguished people, diplomats. In this case, a really, now, as we've established, pretty famous prisoner. And so they consisted of 9 cohorts of 1,000 soldiers apiece. So there's only about 9,000 of them. Each man was handpicked and had to be an Italian. They received double pay and special privileges, and each soldier ranked as a centurion when serving with regular legions. So from time to time, they would be inserted into different units or different legions, and they automatically commanded 100 men. So that's the definition of centurion. They automatically covered 100 men. And most importantly, they had a lot of influence. When these guys were walking around in the community, they were known, they were respected, if they said something or they believed in something or they endorsed something, it would be heated. They would have an audience. People would listen to them, and people would consider what they had to say because, they were influential and, again, highly respected by the people around them. So, and through their involvement, the information about Paul and the gospel and the prayers and the people that were coming and going, the things that he was saying to all of these people, it would have penetrated the military ranks, and it would have also penetrated the citizens of Rome. So this is part of, I believe, the progress that Paul speaks of, and he's going to later mention that he rejoices in. So number 5, regarding Paul's ministry, one of the good things is in number 4, verse 14. And that most of the brethren, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear. So his continued proclamation of the gospel, despite his imprisonment, has really empowered a lot of other people to feel like, this is Paul. He's doing this. He's not afraid to do this. I think I can do it. So it begins to have an effect of being somewhat infectious and emboldening other folks to speak out and to proudly speak out. I think it seems like based on that, most people around began to believe, much like we're going to see Paul's tone shift to, that his freedom really is assured and that he is going to get out. And that very fact kind of emboldens them to believe, you know what, I shouldn't be afraid. Look at what he's enduring, what he's doing. He's going to be ultimately the litmus test for all of us. Whatever happens to him will likely happen to all of us. And so they again gave them courage to continue to proclaim the gospel without fear around him, without fear that they would also be arrested. So if Paul pled the case for the gospel successfully before Caesar and then was free, they all would then confidently begin, and it would be this flowering effect, or this just this exponential effect of people being able to proclaim the gospel. Number 6, we come to one that's labeled as bad. It starts in verse 15. Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ, even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition rather than from pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. So, Paul turns his attention from thinking about the guards and the trial that he believes will go in his favor to the reaction of believers and those other folks that are around him. And he really identifies that there are two groups that have two different motives. So the first group that he talks about preached out of love. That's the one mentioned in verse 14. They were inspired by Paul's imprisonment and the interest in the gospel that it's caused. And it's, again, spawned them to be more genuinely courageous and bold for Christ and for the gospel, preaching to their neighbors, others in the city, motivated by the love that they had for Paul and the admiration, and then, again, the servant leadership that he is exhibiting, and going and being willing to even put himself before Caesar. So, and the reason that, of course, that they were preaching was to save souls, to grow the kingdom, to help others come to the gospel. It wasn't about acquiring fame, money, power, any of those types of things. They were looking at the situation through eyes of faith, if you will. They know Paul's not just another prisoner, but he is part of God's greater plan, which Paul mentions specifically in that block of Scripture. But he mentions the second group as well, that preached out of envy. So that was a completely different motivation, right? We saw as the other group, as I mentioned, he's become somewhat famous, and so some people are envious. They're jealous of his fame, and he's never wanted to be famous, but because of what he's done and where he's at and who he's going to go before, it just has kind of happened. And so their motivation should be for the love of lost souls, but their motivation is one where they want people to see them. They want to be recognized and honored by men, not ultimately be recognized and approved by God. So, it seems that their objective was not to convert the lost, but to somehow create envy, jealousy, and division in Paul's heart. They really want maybe Paul to end up being kind of in their situation where, he can't do what, no, I'm in jail. Now I can't do what they're doing. I want to be doing what they're doing and be in that position where he might react to their success the way they were now reacting to his success, if you will. So it's interesting, though, he does not denounce or even rebuke them for this. Instead, he simply describes their true actions, that they're motivated by selfish ambitions and those things. But, it causes them to, they want the gospel to succeed, but they just want it to be to their own glory, so to speak. They really did, well, they would have loved it for him to have kind of flipped and been in their place where now he's jealous and envious of them and, derailed him. But and it's kind of what I, was hearkening back to when I mentioned, other people see us. And so he stayed the course. He stayed true to who he was and what he said and what he believed in, truly having that servant's heart and that humble heart to not give in to that. And as we talked about early on, I know I shared with you guys that I think it's another one of those humanizing things too, right, for Paul. We talk about, at least in my eyes, I sometimes read the Bible and the apostles and people like Paul as superheroes, right? Like they're larger than life. But it's so humanizing to see that, because as you're clearly alluding to, we see that happen in the church all the time now, where people attack each other, try to bring each other down, and cause envy, and all because of envy, which leads to strife about who's who in different churches, different congregations, even in small communities and small towns. It can be a problem, and certainly with the advent of, as we've covered in other topics, other lessons, with the advent of social media, how easy it is to get baited. Even if you're not in social media and you have a website or a Facebook page, people can get on there and say whatever they want to say about you, and it can lead to strife, and it can be disruptive to what we're ultimately trying to accomplish, which is glorifying God and trying to bring people to Christ. We'll move into verse 18, another good. Verse 18 reads, "What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice." So he explains exactly what we were just talking about, that it could be very discouraging in this situation that some believers are preaching the gospel in order to provoke him to jealousy, but while he is in prison. But he sees this through eyes of faith, if you will, and understands that no matter what, Christ is being proclaimed. And that's never a bad thing at its core. So through this lens of faith, what seems like disorder and seems like acting with improper motives, in his opinion, becomes an opportunity to rejoice, because whenever the gospel is proclaimed, it never returns empty, as we know from Isaiah 55:11. It also does not return empty regardless of who the planter is or the proclaimer. It's going to be God that gives the increase. And I get that from 1 Corinthians 3:7. So it's not the planter or the proclaimer. No matter how good or how bad the motives, the gospel is good. Number 19, verse 19. "For I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and the provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ." So he continues to kind of consider his upcoming trial, what's going on there, and he really does strive to see that, again, through eyes of faith. He is confident that he will not be condemned, but rather that he will be set free. And he's confident of this for the two reasons that we see in this verse. Number one, it depends on their prayers on his behalf. And number two, that he's confident that the Lord will provide with the words, explanations, proper responses, as well as the clear-mindedness and confidence that he will need to have when he faces the highest court in the land. He trusts that Jesus will deliver on the promise made to all of the apostles for the times when they would appear before kings and judges, which is what we read in Luke 12:11, but also is in Matthew 10:19 and 20. And I'll pull over and read that. Matthew 10, verse 19 says very much like what Luke said, "But when they deliver you up, do not become anxious about how or what you will speak, for it shall be given to you in that hour what you are to speak. For it is not you who speak, but it is the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you." So clearly, those are the two things. He needs their prayers, but he needs the Spirit of Jesus to provide the words, the clear-mindedness, and the means to testify appropriately. Verse 20 goes on, "According to my earnest expectation and hope, that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death." So his goal in facing the judges in court is not simply to just be set free from prison. Whether he is set free or not, his higher goal is that he not say or do anything that will undermine the gospel or dishonor Christ. Whether he is set free or found guilty and sent to his death, in either case, the higher purpose is that Jesus will be exalted, honored, and recognized. This higher ideal above living or dying can only be seen through his eyes of faith. He's praying to see all of this through the eyes of faith. It's one of those things that I want to be better at. I told Dawn this week, I want to be better at being bold for Christ and standing firm. And as I said, I'm not ashamed to tell people I'm a Christian, and I don't ever want anybody to think that I am. And it's it's just one of those things that I told Dawn flat, I said, I'm going to start being more bold for Christ. And I mean it.
Behold our King, nothing can compare. Come, let us adore.